In the next 4 videos, we'll look at the complete capabilities of the filter section. Then we'll look at the modulation zoom settings and work with envelopes and low-frequency oscillators. In order to help you visualize how various performance gestures can affect the sound with modulation, I've made aftertouch, velocity, and mod wheel activity visible with these 3 on-screen sliders. We'll start our tutorial off with a complex sample with a slow attack. I'll make the onset more rapid by advancing the sample's start in the oscillator section. This will make the sound more playable for percussive keyboard parts. Let's turn on the filter's power and review. The low-pass filter attenuates the higher partials in a sound above the specified cutoff frequency, which is commonly modulated in a rising and falling shape. Resonance adds an energy boost at the momentary cutoff frequency. Key tracking determines the movement of the cutoff frequency relative to note pitch. With a setting above 0.5, higher notes will contain more partials than lower notes. With settings below 0.5, lower notes will actually be brighter than higher notes. Clicking on the key label inverts the functionality of the key tracking knob. Let's go back to high key tracking with no inversion. Then invert that effect. That low note now becomes much brighter. Let's reset that to a ratio of 1:0 and turn off inversion. Moving on to the envelope knob, remember that when it's above a value of 0, the envelope generator modulates the filter's cutoff frequency. After rising and falling, the envelope arrives at a sustain level. With sustain at 0, there's no offset from the cutoff knob's basic setting. Raising the sustain level means the envelope settles at a value higher than the baseline. The envelope's effect on cutoff can be inverted by clicking on the label. As the envelope rises, the cutoff falls, and vice versa. I'll make some adjustments to the starting value of the cutoff. I didn't hear anything there. Let's try that again. There I can hear the falling and rising. But not there. The velocity sensitivity on the envelope generator is all the way up, and I've been playing very quietly. Let's play harder. There we go. We can clearly hear the inverted low-pass filter envelope. Inverted envelopes can be useful with high-pass filters that are closed when the cutoff frequency is high. The high-pass filter falls, then rises. For high-pass filters, that means opening to allow more frequencies through, then closing again as it rises. Now, I'll use my preset menu to go back to a basic low-pass filter and check out the filter zoom settings to see what's under the hood. The filter section contains 2 filters. The controls in the center duplicate the controls found on the main front panel. Each of the 2 filters has its own power switch. The primary preset menu is available within the zoom settings window. But in addition, each filter has its own pop-up to choose a basic filter type: low pass, high pass, or one of the specialty filters. A band pass filter allows only a restricted frequency range through. This range moves up and down as the cutoff is modulated. With each filter, I can offset the primary cutoff value with the offset slider, or I can adjust the primary control, which affects both filters. A notch filter is the opposite of a bandpass, removing a narrow range of frequencies. This area of rejection moves up and down as you modulate the cutoff frequency, either with the offset or the main knob. All pass filters don't attenuate any band of frequencies, but they do create a phasing effect noticeable as you move the cutoff up and down. There are 2 remaining specialty filters in Omnisphere. One is metal pipe minus, and there'll be metal pipe plus, both of which create comb filtering effects that are sensitive to the cutoff position. I'll set that back to a basic low pass. So far we've only worked with a single filter, but there are two completely independent stereo filters available. Currently, they're running in series. This means that the output of filter 1 is then fed into the input of filter 2. I'll choose a different low-pass filter in the second slot. Cutoff frequency and resonance offsets can be applied. These differentiate the two filters relative to the position of the main knobs located in the center. Now let's check out the spread parameter. I'll start by turning off filter 2, and we'll see how it works with filter 1. Each of the two filters are stereo. Normally the cutoff frequencies are identical in the left and right channels. This can be changed with spread. When moved to the left, the cutoff frequency is higher in the left versus the right channel. Now let's try it with filter 2. And when moved to the right, the cutoff frequencies are higher in the right channel. Next, we can try applying a spread offset to each of the two filters. Now that's interesting. Suddenly I can't hear one of the channels. It turns out we're getting this interaction because the two filters are in series mode. I'll switch over to parallel mode. The input of filter 2 is no longer the output of filter 1. The mix slider controls the relative output levels of the two filters. This has different effects in series and parallel mode. There's also an overall gain control that can be placed pre or post the dual stereo filters. The post setting simply adjusts the volume of a signal that's already been processed by both filters. Choosing pre-filter settings can lead to a change in character of the sound as you ride the gain slider up and down, as these interact with the filter in front of it. After you've made your final adjustments to your filter sound, the preset is now labeled as modified in the preset pop-up. Don't forget that you can save this preset with its own name for later use. So we've covered the filter extensively. In our next video, we'll work closely with modulation and modulation zoom settings. In this video, we'll work more closely with modulation and modulation zoom settings. Modulators work by changing some aspect of the sound in the audio signal flow. So let's modify the sound by turning on the wave shaper. We'll turn on the power and choose an algorithm. We bring up the depth and the mix sliders to check out the sound that we'll be aiming for. But then we bring depth and mix down so that we can modulate them back up using the mod wheel. Right-click on the depth slider and choose Modulate with Wheel. Right-click on the mix slider and do the same. This is a reminder that one source of modulation can be used to control multiple targets simultaneously. This section of the interface updates to show me the most recently assigned modulation routing, and the pop-up allows me to choose any of the routings to edit. If I want to see and edit all of my modulation routings simultaneously within a single window, I'll go to Modulation Zoom Settings with the magnifying glass. Here I can see the mod wheel modulating both wave shaper depth and mix. Here we can set the depth or range of the effect the source will have on the target. We can also adjust the target parameter's initial setting, that is, its value before any modulation occurs. The controls in the mod zoom page simply duplicate the same controls found in the edit page. Remember that the blue line indicates the total possible range of modulation from the target parameter's initial value. This is adjusted with the depth control. The white dot indicates the actual value of the target parameter at any moment in time as it's being modulated. I've created two targets for the mod wheel where the depth is modulated less intensely than the wave shaper mix. The mute button allows me to temporarily disable one of these routings without getting rid of it. Now let's check out the invert option. Well, there's no effect yet. We'll have to move the target parameter's initial value up. Now, as the mod wheel moves up, the target parameters values can move down from their baseline setting. In this case, I'll turn off inversion so that moving the mod wheel up increases the distortion effect. However, we can take advantage of inversion to create interesting effects by using the mod wheel for a third modulation, in this case, filter cutoff. Since raising the mod wheel will increase the presence of distortion harmonics, we can tame the effect somewhat by having the mod wheel lower the cutoff frequency of a low-pass filter at the same time. So I'll reset the modulations to non-inverted for the wave shaper and set up an inverted modulation for the filter's cutoff. For the filter, I'll raise the initial cutoff value before inverting. Check out the movement of the white dots as you listen to the effect. Having all the modulation routings together on one page is very helpful. In this case, I have 3 separate routings combined together for a single effect and can adjust accordingly. Let's add one more element to the mod wheel stew. I'll turn on the ring mod function and search for the effect that I'd like to hear when the mod wheel is in the up position. This means bringing the depth slider up while I audition sounds, but then bringing it down, right-clicking and choosing Modulate with Wheel again. Now I have 4 different targets being modulated by the mod wheel. You know the drill. Adjust the depth of modulation as well as the target parameter's initial setting. The blue lines and the white dots, one of Omnisphere's best features, help you visualize what's going on with your modulations. Next, we'll work with a different type of target. Let's check out sample timbre in crush mode. Sample timbre only has a single value for each sustained note, but each new note can have a different timbre. So let's right-click on that knob, and this time choose Modulate with Randomize. The random modulator is one of my favorites. It creates a different value with each note-on event. The blue line extends above and below the target's initial value. This means that the random effect is bipolar and pushes the value randomly either above or below the initial setting. Let's check out another way that we might modulate sample timbre. I'll right-click on the target and choose Modulate with LFO. By default, the first available LFO, number 1, is selected as the source. However, I'd like to use LFO2, so I'll select it from the source pop-up, and then I'll highlight LFO2 in the LFO section. To temporarily mute the other modulator affecting timbre, I could select it from the pop-up here and choose Mute right from this window. Or I can go to my modulation zoom settings window and mute that routing here. While I'm here, I might as well make some other adjustments. Let's fiddle with the target parameter setting. LFO2 is a very slow sine wave, freely moving up and down, meaning notes played at various times will have different sample timbre values. I know you can hear that, right? Right? Maybe not. The blue line's there, but the white dot's not moving. It turns out that the depth knob in LFO2 is turned all the way down. There we go. The depth knob allows you to change the LFO's strength over multiple targets simultaneously, and it can be modulated. Now the blue line extends in both directions, meaning the LFO is bipolar. Click on the plus button in the LFO to make it unipolar. When the LFO is unipolar, it only modulates the target in an upwards direction. But I'm feeling a little bipolar today, so. One of the coolest things about the depth knob is that it makes secondary modulation so easy. Let's bring that all the way down so that the LFO is flat, and right-click to modulate it with velocity. The LFO's effectiveness to modulate its target will be dependent upon the velocity of each note you play. Of course, you could choose Modulate with Wheel or any other secondary modulator. Once again, we've created an effect that requires multiple routings. Both a slight randomization and LFO2 are modulating sample timbre. The effect of the LFO is dependent upon note velocity. There's lots of secondary modulation in Omnisphere. The velocity sensitivity controls in the envelope generators are another common example. Let's see what happens when we work with a second layer. Here, I've added a sound in layer B. I'll mute layer A. There's that resonant filter with a fast envelope. Under Modulation Zoom Settings, I've selected Layer B. Modulations that affect Layer B are highlighted, and those that affect Layer A are grayed out. If I switch to Layer A, the opposite is true. Certain modulations apply to both layers and won't gray out. The LFOs and the modulation envelopes are common to the entire patch, so any modulations that use them will always be visible. Let's reactivate Layer A and check out our sound. The sound responds to mod wheel activity, as well as changes in velocity, and random changes with every note played. Let's see how this works out in the context of a tune. Keep your eyes on the mod wheel activity, as well as the velocities of the incoming notes. Like it or not, this sound is not a static sound. So we've checked out modulation using performance gestures, velocity, mod wheel, and so on. Coming up next, I'll spend some more time with envelopes and the LFOs. Oh, and don't forget, there's always post-automation as well. See you next video. Now, we're going to really figure out what's going on with Omnisphere's envelopes. In this video, we'll look closely at the amplitude and filter envelopes. There are separate dedicated amplitude and filter envelopes for each of the two layers in an Omnisphere patch, unlike the modulation envelopes, which are shared among both layers. These envelopes default to being ADSR, simple 4-point envelopes. Here I'm looking at the amplitude envelope, which controls volume. I'll go to Envelope Zoom to edit. Here, we can edit the envelope graphically. As long as we add no additional points, the envelope still remains in ADSR. There, I lengthen the attack time, raise and lower the sustain level, and shorten the decay time in a simple, easy to understand graphical interface. The default lines that connect each of the dots are curves that can be adjusted by simply grabbing the middle of the line with the mouse and pulling up or down. The last stage of the envelope is the release stage. Next, I'll program a release stage that lasts for over 3 seconds and actually rises in volume until it abruptly cuts off the sound. Starting now. Keep in mind that release stages always begin as soon as a note is released. The zoom slider controls the amount of time visible in the display. Press Auto Zoom to completely fit the entire length of the envelope within the window. All envelopes in Omnisphere contain a loop button. The envelope will repeat from the first attack point to the last sustain point prior to the release stage. Velocity sensitivity is adjustable here as well as on the front panel. In this example, the volume envelope is no longer responsive to velocity, but the filter envelope remains so. I can switch to the filter envelope from within Filter Zoom and adjust its velocity sensitivity there. Changes made here simply duplicate the same controls on the front panel, where they can also be readjusted. Most of the controls for the amplitude and filter envelopes are the same as those for the modulation envelopes. Let's check them out. Move the speed slider to the left to expand all time values. Moving to the right compresses all time values. The envelopes have several features that help you lock to the rhythm of any songs you're working on. Use the sync button to have the envelope automatically follow and correctly display your song's tempo and measure numbers. Turn on snap to lock points as you move them to the nearest 16th note. Here I've used snap and sync together to create a smooth rising and falling envelope with the points on half-note increments. So far, we've worked with simple 4-point envelopes. However, you can add as many points as you like and create extremely complex effects. Add a point to the line by right or control clicking on it and selecting Add. The default type of line segment that's added is one which can be either a straight line or a parabola type curve. This is the Curve 1 type of segment and can be easily adjusted with the mouse. Change the line segment's type by right-clicking on it and selecting the new shape. Here I'll select 4 pulses. There's also a 3-pulse shape. There's an alternate type of adjustable curve called the bump. This is also easily adjustable with the mouse. Double-clicking on a point is a simple and fast way to remove that point and line segment. Each of the line segments in an envelope can be of a different shape or type than the other segments. Using the Add function to create a new line segment always creates a new segment of the same type as the line you just clicked on. Here I'm adding multiple spike segments one after the other. Turn off the Snap function in order to freely move points in time. It takes a little experimentation to get used to the different line segment types. For instance, this spike shape just won't go where I want it to by dragging. I have to change it to a Curve 1 type to get what I'm looking for. As I adjust the position of points in the envelope, the line segments that immediately precede and follow it are altered. The rest of the envelope remains in place. Engage the Lock button to have the entire remainder of the envelope move forwards and backwards in time along with the point that you're moving. The XY button locks your movements to either horizontal or vertical axis only. The Find button allows you to make very detailed changes to a point. Like the Speed slider, Scale mode allows you to compress or expand the entire envelope in time. Similar time-based functions can be found under the Edit pull-down. Repeat duplicates the entire envelope. Use double time to make the envelope twice as fast. And use the half time option to make the envelope twice as slow. Now here's the part that reminds me of my life. It's the Chaos button. Each time you press this button, you can randomize either the levels of the existing points or the curvature of the existing line segments. The amount of randomization is determined by these controls. For instance, I could randomize only the levels. Or I can reverse that procedure and randomize only the curves. You can always revert any filter or amplitude envelope back to a simple ADSR type by using the envelope presets from the top pull-down. There's one thing you should know about the amplitude and filter envelopes in Omnisphere. No, they haven't been seeing anybody, but they are polyphonic. Check out these rolled or flammed chords I'm playing. Each and every sustaining note gets its own envelope generator, triggered at note on. The envelopes of multiple sustaining notes are not synchronized to each other in any way. They all run independently. But wait, there's more. See you in Envelopes Part 2. In this video, we'll move on to working with Omnisphere's modulation envelopes. There are 4 available per patch, shared by both layers. This is different than the amp and filter envelopes, which are separately available for each layer and control that layer's volume and tone. They have built-in velocity sensitivity controls. In this video, I'll set up a mod envelope to also control amplitude. Now check this out. We know each note's volume is shaped by the amp envelope. I've set up a modulation routing where mod envelope 1 controls the target amplitude. This target refers to the volume of the layer after it's passed through the amp envelope. This parameter is not available as a control anywhere in the edit page. However, you will find it available in the target pop-ups. I'll unmute this routing. The target parameter is layer amplitude. I'll drop its initial value to 0. I hear no sound when I play. even though the mod envelope's supposed to be modulating amplitude. Select the Mod Envelopes tab. There are 4 mod envelopes selectable with these switches. The mystery is solved when we select Mod Envelope 1. We see that its depth control is all the way down. Now we can hear the mod envelope controlling the layer's volume. The squiggly graphic tells me that Mod Envelope 1 is a complex rather than simple envelope. Click on the X button to quickly convert a complex envelope back to an ADSR. Opening up Envelope Zoom, we'll see this 1/8 note step shape, the default for mod envelopes. Here we see a few additions to the Envelope Zoom page. There's Auto Chaos and 3 trigger options that are not available in the filter and amplitude envelopes. So let's see how these options work, starting with the Note Trigger option. Under my preset pop-up, I'll select a simple ADSR type. With the sync option engaged, the beat numbers here match those on my host sequencer. I'll turn on looping. The envelope repeats from the first attack point to the last sustain point before the release. Snap locks moving points to the nearest 16th note. Right-click to add a new point. I'll move the new point to the second 1/8 note and use the mouse to adjust the curvature of the line segment. I'll add another point at the next 1/8 note and adjust the curvature of the line segment preceding it. The first trigger mode is called Note. In this mode, whenever any note is played, the envelope automatically jumps to its starting point. This is true even if another note is still sustaining. Unlike the amp and filter envelopes, the mod envelopes are monophonic. The amplitude of these multiple sustaining notes are modulated together, even though they were triggered at different times. All sustaining voices are controlled by a single monophonic modulation envelope. Next, let's check out legato mode. When notes are disconnected, the envelope will re-trigger from the beginning. But when overlapping or played legato, the envelope does not re-trigger. Here, you can clearly hear the synchronized monophonic nature of the mod envelope. All voices move in tandem. The final trigger mode is song mode. This locks the mod envelope to your host sequencer's tempo. The sustaining notes are getting muted too quickly. I'll change the curvature of the filter envelope to have them sustain in a brighter fashion. The numbers on the top of the mod envelope represent quarter notes in my host sequence. Reviewing the Chaos button, we can choose whether to randomize curves, levels, or both. I can manually randomize the envelope by pressing the Chaos button with the mouse. As chaos is not undoable, it's a good idea to save presets that you like. Reloading my original, I'll choose to randomize curves instead of levels. Obviously, pressing the Chaos button with the mouse every time you want to randomize the envelope is not always practical. That's where Auto Chaos comes in really handy. Turning on Auto Chaos causes the envelope to randomize according to your settings every time the envelope repeats. Talk about non-static sounds. Auto Chaos is a fantastic way to introduce subtle, continuous, random variation to your sounds. For me, that's the real ear candy. It's time to work with the low-frequency oscillators, or LFOs, our final modulator type. In this video, we'll use an LFO to modulate filter cutoff, an extremely common modulation. I've set it up in the modulation routings. To make things clear, I've disabled velocity's modulation of cutoff so that we can hear the effect of the LFO. In the filter section, we can see that the envelope still controls filter cutoff. I'll disable that as well. This filter effect is currently produced by LFO1, set to a square wave shape. The LFO has its own depth slider, useful for secondary modulation or when there are multiple targets. In this video, we'll take a close look at the phase switch. This is the unipolar switch. When it's not engaged, the LFO is in bipolar mode. The two-stepper arrows can be used to select different LFO wave shapes. We'll also be checking out the 4 trigger modes, the sync option, and the delay slider. Now check out these different wave shapes here in unipolar mode. This is a classic down sawtooth or downward ramp LFO shape. I'll switch that to a useful square wave variation with rounded or smoothed edges. Moving the setting to the middle, I'll switch to bipolar mode. The square wave modulates both below and above the target setting. This is a true square wave with those very sharp edges and immediate transitions. The sync button is turned off. This means that our rate knob makes adjustments in cycles per second or hertz. I'll switch that to a simple triangle wave. Modulating rate can be kind of a cool effect if used sparingly. We've already worked with setting up modulations by right-clicking on the knob and choosing a modulation source for this target. If we're working with an actual MIDI controller, we can just jump down to MIDI CC Learn and move the physical controller. The assignment is immediately learned. The physical MIDI controller now controls the rate knob. The sync button locks the LFO to the host tempo. In this mode, the options for the rate control are musical increments, here set to an 1/8 note. I'll switch back to unipolar mode and lower the target value all the way to 0. The resonant filter can really boost the low end. There's a sine wave shape, a random shape, and a spiky shape. But this is one of my favorites, stepped random, otherwise known as sample and hold. You've definitely heard this 16th note sample and hold effect before. Synchronized to my song tempo, the filter cutoff jumps and holds in 16th note intervals. Still synchronized to my host tempo, I'll switch to an 1/8 note and change the shape to a square wave. Listen to the LFO as I play and sustain multiple notes with a rolling chord. That effect should sound familiar. Regardless of when the notes are played, the filter cutoffs all move in tandem. You guessed right, the LFOs are monophonic, just like the mod envelopes. The trigger modes will be familiar from the mod envelopes as well. In note mode, the LFO always jumps to its start phase whenever a new note is played, regardless of other sustaining notes. In legato mode, the LFO will only restart if notes are played in a disconnected fashion. Any note played while another note is still being held down will not cause the LFO to restart. Song position mode causes the LFO to track the bars and beats from the host sequencer. Use this option if you want to hear identical results every time you press play in your host sequencer. Let's check out the phase control by switching to a down sawtooth waveform in legato trigger mode. I can set the LFO to trigger in the middle of the down ramp, or trigger near the end of its cycle. So trigger mode determines when the LFO restarts, and phase determines from where. Let's go to the delay slider, an extremely musical tool. It causes the depth of the LFO to ramp up. The slider adjusts the amount of time it takes for this ramping up to occur. So let's have some fun. We'll switch our rate to a 16th note. Try out some LFO shapes. Let's settle for the sample and hold, stepped random. Check out the effect of the long, delay ramp on the filter. It takes a while for the ramp to allow the LFO to boost the filter cutoff. So at the beginning of every note, the highly resonant filter cutoff hangs out in very low registers. The filter envelope can interact with the LFO and the LFO delay ramp, adjust them all together to get precisely the right effect.